Doctrine and Covenants 51 through 57. In the spring of 1831, Kirtland, Ohio seemed to be bursting at the seams with Latter-day Saints. Obeying God's previous command, the Saints were gathering in Ohio, and Church Bishop Edward Partridge had to figure out what to do with all of them. Luckily, new convert Leman Copley had covenanted to allow the emigrating Saints to use his 759-acre farm for this purpose. So when the faithful band of Colesville, New York Saints, all 60 or so of them, arrived in Kirtland in May of 1831, they settled on Leman's land. Now, with all of these new Saints arriving, church leaders held a multi-day conference of elders at the beginning of June. The men gathered in a log schoolhouse and sat on uncomfortable slab benches. But despite their discomfort, there was a strong spirit of harmony and faith among the men. Joseph began the meeting and proceeded to ordain elders to the high priesthood. But the meeting was suddenly interrupted by the influence of the adversary. Two elders at the meeting, Harvey Whitlock and John Murdoch, were bound by the adversary so that they couldn't speak. The entire group likely sat still, paralyzed by fear. But Joseph stood and commanded the devil in the name of Jesus Christ to leave. Unable to resist the power of God's priesthood, the adversary was compelled to leave, and the meeting continued. The next day, the men gathered again, and the revelation now known as Doctrine and Covenants 52 was received. The revelation, in part, called for Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon to travel to Missouri, a land consecrated as the Saints' inheritance. When the conference ended, Joseph, Sidney, and the other elders who had been called of God started preparing immediately for their missions to the West. But as Joseph prepared for his trip, he must have been worried about Emma. Just over a month before, she had given birth to twins who had only lived for a few hours. The same day, their close friends the Murdochs had also had twins, but the mother had died. John Murdoch, knowing of Joseph and Emma's loss, gave them his twins to raise. How could Joseph leave Emma, who was so heartsick over the loss of her babies and her friend, and probably overwhelmed at caring for two infants? As Joseph likely pondered these things, he was approached by Algernon Sidney Gilbert, a faithful member in Kirtland who co-owned a store with Newell K. Whitney. Sidney wanted to know his place in God's kingdom, and Joseph received the revelation now known as Doctrine and Covenants 53, in which Sidney was called to be an elder and agent to the church bishop. Near the same time, Joseph was also approached by Sidney's store partner, Newell K. Whitney, who was also a faithful member of the church. Newell was responsible for helping the emigrating Saints find places to settle in and around Kirtland. However, the Colesville Saints who had settled on Leman Copley's land didn't know what to do. Leman had returned from his mission to the Shakers and changed his mind about consecrating half his land and then selling the other half to the church. The Colesville Saints had been working hard on the land. They'd planted Leman's fields, they'd built fences, they'd improved his property. But Leman rescinded his previous offer and kicked the Saints off the land, demanding that they pay him rent for the time they'd been there. Unsure of what to do, Newell and other leaders went to Joseph for direction, and the revelation in Doctrine and Covenants 54 was received. The Colesville Saints were told to move on to Missouri. During this time of confusion and heavy responsibilities for Joseph, William W. Phelps arrived in Kirtland from Canandaigua, New York, with his wife and children. Now, Brother Phelps was a very capable man who had been a newspaper editor, and he wanted to know what his role was to be in the restored church. Joseph inquired of the Lord on his behalf and received the revelation in Doctrine and Covenants 55, which instructed William that he would be ordained an elder and also assist Oliver Cowdery in printing, selecting, and writing books to be used in schools so that the children could be instructed in a manner pleasing to the Lord. Having now received personal revelations for brothers Gilbert, Whitney, and Phelps, Joseph probably thought he was done putting out fires and receiving revelations for other people before he left on his mission to Missouri. However, one more problem reared its ugly head before his departure. 7 months previous, new member Frederick G. Williams had joined the missionaries to the Lamanites. He left behind his family and his 144-acre Kirtland farm, which he left at the church's disposal. Frederick's family had then made an agreement with Joseph Smith Sr. and Ezra Thayer. Joseph Smith Sr. would manage the farm during Frederick's absence, and the Smiths, Williams, and Thayers would live together until a home could be built for the Thayers on the Williams property. However, the house wasn't yet built when Ezra was called to go on a mission with Thomas B. Marsh to Missouri at the recent conference. He wanted some guarantee that his financial interests were secured in Kirtland before he would leave. He wanted land in his name or to get his money back that he'd consecrated to the church. However, this wasn't how the law of consecration worked. Joseph inquired of the Lord what should be done in this matter, and the revelation in Doctrine and Covenants 56 was received. In this revelation, Ezra's missionary call was revoked, and he received one of the sternest rebukes contained in the Doctrine and Covenants. But finally, it was time for Joseph to go to Missouri. Discovering the location of Zion was of key importance to the saints, who believed they would be protected there from the tribulations coming to the world. And so Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Martin Harris, Edward Partridge, William W. Phelps, Joseph Coe, Algernon S. Gilbert, and his wife traveled from Kirtland, Ohio toward Missouri in wagons, canal boats, stagecoaches, and by foot. When they arrived, though, it was a stark contrast from what they had left behind. Many in their party had recently moved from New York, which was a relatively cultivated society. But here in Missouri, it was wilderness. It was the Wild West of the United States at the time. As Joseph encountered this untamed land, he pondered, when will the wilderness blossom as the rose? When will Zion be built up in her glory? And where will thy temples stand unto which all nations shall come in the last day? In response, the Lord revealed the words in Doctrine and Covenants 57, which assured Joseph and all the saints that this was the land the Lord had consecrated for them, and that the Lord had a plan for it to blossom as the rose. And that's what's happening in Come Follow Me this week. Click like and subscribe so that YouTube will share these videos with more people, and check out the Start Here app for daily Come Follow Me study prompts.